Okay, so we are reading the Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield. We are on the chapter, The Emerging Culture, page number 270 of the book and 150 of the PDF.
We know what spirituality is, Father Sanchez. Do we? I think not. We spent centuries talking about it, visualizing it, professing our belief in it. But we've always characterized this connection as something abstract, something we believe in intellectually.
Stop it.
And we've always cast this connection as something an individual must do to avoid something bad happening rather than to acquire something good and tremendous.
So, what is this saying over here? Okay, so now we've been constantly talking about this only. Are we operating from the left side of the grid or are we operating from the right side of it? 99% of the time, if you really start looking at where you're operating from, you would find that you're operating from the left side of the grid, which is what he's saying over here.
The manuscript describes the inspiration that comes when we are truly loving others and evolving our lives forward.
So, what does this mean? Shifting from the left side of the grid to the right side of the grid, where you empower yourself and you put yourself in a position to give energy to other people.
Evolve, evolve. Listen to yourself, Father. You have always fought against the influence of evolution. What has happened to you? Sanchez collected himself. Yes, I fought against the idea of evolution as a replacement for God, as a way to explain the universe without reference to God. But now I see that the truth is a synthesis of the scientific and religious worldviews. The truth is that evolution is the way God created and is still creating.
So, again,
But there is
a synthesis of science and spirituality. Ultimately, everything spiritual has a scientific basis. But till we can really understand what is the scientific basis of what is being said in spirituality, we tend to ignore it or we tend to operate out of fear, right? Which puts us on the left side of the grid. So we saw it in the movie also, where Father Sanchez and Peter, they go to attempt to talk to Father Sebastian to convert him to the understanding that the insights are actually good for evolving and evolution of the spiritual realm also.
But there is no evolution, protested. God created this world and that's it. Sanchez glanced at me, but I had no ideas to express.
So again,
Cardinal Sebastian, he
this
continued.
is the problem over here, but there is no evolution. So now if we are not growing, if we are not evolving, if we are not expanding, then we have stagnated, and anything that stagnates starts to rot. Okay, so if you see most religions, if they are not putting themselves into a position of evolving and transforming according to what is required, they start to go down in the energy level. This has been seen very clearly when we read the book. We'll read it at some point in time. The power versus force. When the religion started, it started at a very high level of consciousness, maybe at 900 on a scale from 1 to 1000 on 900, that is above 500, most religions. But as people started contaminating the teachings, okay, the energy in the scale of consciousness of these various religions, it started to devolve, it started to fall. One of the beauties of Hinduism is that it is constantly evolving and integrating whatever is coming up. That's why Hinduism constantly, it imbibes every culture into it. And everything is allowed under Hinduism in certain circumstances. So it depending on what you want in your life, it is allowed in Hinduism. So that's the very big strength of Hinduism.
Cardinal Sebastian, he continued, the manuscript describes the progress of succeeding generations as an evolution of understanding, an evolution towards a higher spirituality and vibration. Each generation incorporates more energy and accumulates more truth and then passes that status on to the people of the next generation who extend it further.
So
That's nonsense,
what is he saying
Sebastian
it over
said.
here? Shivangla, your volume you have to reduce. So, what is he saying over here? We learn from the previous generation. Today, when we were growing up, we didn't know how to use a remote control, right? Today, a 2 year old baby can start and switch off the TV. So, what is that? We are evolving. I've used this example of the crossword puzzle many times when we are talking, where once a crossword puzzle has been solved, it becomes easier for the next person to solve the crossword puzzle. Okay. And as more and more people solve the crossword puzzle, it becomes easier and easier. So again, it's a part of the morphogenic field where as soon as someone has done it, it becomes easier for the next person to do it. Again, it's like the 10-second barrier for the 100-meter race. There was a barrier, and for years and years, no one could cross it. Then one person crossed it, did it below 10 seconds, and then multiple people started doing it. Okay, like Mount Everest, no one had climbed it. Once one person climbed it, now umpteen people are climbing Mount Everest. So what he's saying is here is that every successful generation builds on the learning of the previous generation.
That's nonsense, Sebastian said. There is only one way to become more spiritual, and that's by following the examples in the scriptures. Exactly, Sanchez said. But again, what are the examples? Isn't the story of the scriptures a story of people learning to receive God's energy and will within? Isn't that what the early prophets led the people to do in the Old Testament? And isn't that receptivity to God's energy within what culminated in the life of a carpenter's son to the extent that we say God Himself descended to earth?
Ajay Shivangla, slow down a little bit. Huh? You're reading too fast. Okay, so again, basically all growth takes place experientially. So when you have an experience and you explain that experience to the next person, that is how knowledge evolves. Okay, out of experiencing. So if I experience something, I share it with you, then you share it with someone else. Having said that, we need to grow. When we grow, we need both. We need knowledge that okay, this is possible, and we need the actual experience. So we have something which is very, very stark in front of us. That picture that Kavita Didi took the other day. Now, Dr. Brian Daly had actually come and shown us a lot of these pictures. But again, it was just knowledge for us. We had not experienced it. Now, when she took that picture the other day and we can see her face, now we know that what Dr. Brian Daly was talking about is actually possible. Now, for all of us, that becomes a knowing. Okay, now again, we may have skepticism about it, but for a number of us, it becomes the truth. For me, it's become a truth, right? I always was skeptical that ye ho sakta hai ki nahi. I didn't know. I knew that orbs can be photographed. That I knew because I've seen orbs photographs where a actual picture is taken and the orb shows up. But an actual face showing up, this is the first time that I have seen it. And I'm seeing it pratyaksh. Okay. So now even if anyone tells me it's not possible, as far as I am concerned, it is possible. So now it's become a knowing for me. It's become wisdom for me. Up to now, it was just information. It was just someone else's experience that I believe Dr. Brian Daly, right? That he's taken some pictures and it is there. But I've not seen it for myself. But here now I've seen it for myself. So now it becomes wisdom. So this is what he's talking about over here.
Exactly, Sanchez said. But again, what are the examples? Isn't the story of the scriptures a story of people learning to receive God's energy and will within? Isn't that what the early prophets led the people to do in the Old Testament? And isn't that receptivity to God's energy within what culminated in the life of a carpenter's son, to the extent that we say God Himself descended to earth? Isn't the story of the New Testament, he continued, the story of a group of people being filled with some kind of energy that transformed them? Didn't Jesus Himself say that what He did, we could do also and more? We've never really taken that idea seriously, not until now. We're only now grasping what Jesus was talking about, where he was leading us. The manuscript clarifies what he meant, how to do it.
So again, all of us have that ultimate ansh. In the Gita, you call it the Atma. Okay, you can call it the energy, you can call it the chi, you can call it the ki. Everyone has that energy in us, right? Now, how we use that energy and how we manifest that energy in the how in our lives is what the game is all about. And when Jesus said that you also can do it, so what was he referring to? He was referring to that ansh, that particular energy which is there in all of us, which was there in Jesus also. It's just that he was able to connect to it in a much more powerful way than we connect in it. But as we evolve, our connection with that will also evolve. And then again, it becomes belief system. It becomes how we are engaging it. And all those factors will start to creep in. But everything is possible. So whatever Jesus could do, we can do. Now, I could have never imagined that I could bend spoons and forks, but I could do it, right? Now, if I can do it, I'm sure all of you can do it. So, the fact of the matter is that as we evolve and we start expanding our horizon, we can do more and more and more. And there is nothing that we can't do at the end of it. We are restricted basically by our own box, our own belief system. And at the end of the day, what are we working at? We are wanting to transcend our belief system. Okay.
Sebastian looked away, his face red with anger. During the pause in the conversation, a high ranking officer burst into the room and told Sebastian that the intruders had been seen. Look, the officer said, pointing out the window. There they are. 300 or 400 yards away, we could see two figures running through an open field headed towards the forest. A number of soldiers at the edge of the clearing seemed ready to open fire. The officer turned from the window and looked at Sebastian, his radio raised. If they get to the wooded area, he said, they will be hard to find. Do I have your permission to open fire? As I watched the two running, I suddenly recognized who they were. That's Will and Julia, I shouted. Sanchez walked even closer to Sebastian. In the name of God, you cannot commit murder over this. The officer persisted. Cardinal Sebastian, if you want this manuscript contained, I must give the order now. I was frozen. Father, trust me, Sanchez was saying. The manuscript will not erode all you have built, all you have stood for. You cannot kill these people. Sebastian shook his head. Trust you? Then he sat down on his desk and looked at the officer. We will shoot no one. Tell your troops to capture them alive. The officer nodded and walked out of the room. Sanchez said, Thank you. You made the right choice. Not to kill, yes, Sebastian said, but I will not change my mind. This manuscript is a curse. It would undermine our basic structure of spiritual authority. It would entice people to think they are in control of their spiritual destiny.
So
It would
again, over
undermine
here,
the
Shraddha,
discipline
so
needed to
again over
bring.
here, what is his fear? That the church will lose authority and power. Okay, that's the biggest fear that is driving Cardinal Sebastian right now.
This manuscript is a curse. It would undermine our basic structure of spiritual authority. It would entice people to think they are in control of their spiritual destiny. It would undermine the discipline needed to bring everyone on the planet into the church, and people would be caught wanting when the rapture comes. He looked hard at Sanchez. At this moment, thousands of troops are arriving. It doesn't matter what you or anyone else does. The Ninth Insight will never leave Peru. Now get out of my mission. As we sped away, we could hear dozens of trucks approaching in the distance. Why did he let us go? I asked. I suppose because he thinks it makes no difference, Sanchez replied. That there's nothing we can do. I really don't know what to think. His eyes met mine. We didn't convince him, you know. I too was confused. What did it mean? Perhaps we hadn't been there to convince Sebastian after all. Perhaps we were just supposed to delay him. I glanced back at Sanchez. He was concentrating on driving and searching the roadside for any sign of Will and Julia. We had decided that we would double back in the direction they had been running, but so far we had seen nothing. As we rode, my mind wandered to the Celestine ruins. I imagined what the site looked like, the tiered excavations, the scientists' tents, the looming pyramidal structures in the background. They don't seem to be in these woods, Sanchez said. They must have had a vehicle. We must decide what to do. I think we should go to the ruins, I said. He
Okay, so
looked
why did he say that we want to go to the ruins? Because he started having thoughts of the ruins, right? So now he started to follow his instinct, follow the directive.
he looked at me. We might as well. There's nowhere else to go. Sanchez made a turn to the west. What do you know of these ruins? I asked. They were built by two different cultures, as Julia said. The first, the Mayans, had a thriving civilization there, though most of their temples were further north in the Yucatan. Mysteriously, all signs of their civilization suddenly vanished about 600 BC without apparent cause. The Incas developed another civilization afterward at the same location.
So now, what happened to the Mayans? According to this, what we saw in the movie, that they raised their energy frequency so much that they actually transported themselves into another state of existence, right? And they were able to hold that energy. So they actually just shifted phase.
What do you think happened to the Mayans? Sanchez glanced at me. I don't know. We rode for several minutes in silence. Then I suddenly remembered that Father Sanchez had told Sebastian he had read more of the Ninth Insight. How did you see more of the Ninth Insight? I asked. The young soldier who helped us knew where another part was being hidden. After you and I were separated, he took me to another room and showed it to me. It added only a few more concepts to what Phil and Dobson told us, but it gave me the points I used with Sebastian. What did it say specifically? That the manuscript would clarify many religions and would help them fulfill their promise. All religion, it says, is about humankind finding relationship to one higher source. And all religions speak of a perception of God within, a perception that fills us, makes us more than we were. Religions become corrupted when leaders are assigned to explain God's will to the people instead of showing them how to find the direction within themselves.
Now, this becomes extremely important. Okay. All religions are basically squeezed towards finding that divine connection within ourselves. Now, when authority is given to someone to tell us what is right and what is wrong, rather than empowering ourselves to be able to find that connection, is where corruption starts to take place and the entire process gets squeezed, right? Because again, it leads directly into a control drama. Now, today, why is Sebastian acting in the way that he's acting? It's a control drama. they are fearing that their ability to control the population and draw energy from the population is going to get undermined. So they that is what is driving the aggression against the insights, right? So they are playing what role? They're playing the intimidator role now, right? To grab the power. Now once that starts happening, the religion is corrupted. So this is what this is saying here.
The manuscript says that sometime in history, one individual would grasp the exact way of connecting with God's source of energy and direction and would thus become a lasting example that this connection is possible. Sanchez looked at me. Isn't that what Jesus really did? Didn't he increase his energy and vibration until he was light enough to? Sanchez ended his sentence without finishing it and seemed to be deep in thought.
So
What
again,
are
what
you
is
thinking? I asked.
one second? So now what is this? That any of the religions you will find, each of the leaders had a spiritual experience. They had an out of body experience. So Jesus went to that mountain and he saw that burning bush. Muhammad saw the burning bush. So they had a transcendental experience. Now, when they had that transcendental experience, it shifted something in their consciousness. And then they brought back that experience and attempted to explain it to people. Now, since they had had that experience, but the people who they were explaining it to had not had that experience, when the original person transcended, the followers who had not had the full experience wanted to explain that experience to others. Now naturally they were they were found wanting, and that's how the corruption of the religions start. As we go down the ladder, the people are talking from just a knowing, not an experience, which is not wisdom. So that is when the corruption starts to happen.
What are you thinking? I asked. Sanchez looked perplexed. I don't know. The soldier's copy ended right there. It said that this individual would blaze a path that the whole human race was destined to follow, but it didn't say where this path led. For 15 minutes, we rode in silence. I attempted to receive some indication of what would happen next, but I could think of nothing. I seemed to be trying too hard.
Again, so trying too hard. Okay. So when we are going into these concepts, trying becomes counterproductive. And in all the Monroe workshops, we are constantly telling people, allow, let's not try. If you try, then where are you working from? From the conscious mind. And from the conscious mind, it is not possible to expand it because you're operating with what you already know. If you want to expand, you have to jack into something which you consciously don't know, which is the subconscious or the universal consciousness. So if I'm trying, I am not allowing. And only when I'm allowing can that infinite consciousness connect with our conscious mind, which are normal conscious 3D consciousness, to be able to evolve into something new.
There are the ruins, Sanchez said. Ahead through the forest to the left of the road, I could make out three large pyramidal shaped structures. After we parked and walked closer, I could tell the pyramids were constructed of cut stone and were spaced an equal distance apart, about 100 feet. Between them was an area paved with the smoothest stone. Several excavation sites were dug into the base of the pyramids. Look there, Sanchez said, pointing towards the more distant pyramids. A lone figure was sitting in front of the structure. As we walked that way, I noticed an increase in my energy level. By the time we reached the center of the paved area, I felt incredibly energized. I looked at Sanchez, and he raised an eyebrow. When we got closer, I recognized the person by the pyramid to be Julia. She sat cross legged and held several papers in her lap.
So now, again, we talked about this, that there are various energy centers all over the world, that the moment you walk into them, you get energized. All our really great temples were made with energy fields in mind, that when you walked into them, they energized you. Okay, so there are certain naturally forming spaces where you actually get energized. So the Celestine ruins was one of these places, that when you walked into it, your energy level automatically started to get enhanced.
Julia, Sanchez called. Julia turned and stood up. Her face seemed iridescent. Where is Will? I asked. Julia pointed to her right. There, perhaps 100 yards away, was Will. He seemed to be glowing in the fading twilight. What is he doing? I asked. The ninth, Julia replied, holding the papers towards us. Sanchez told Julia that we had seen some of the insight, the part which foretold of a human world transformed by conscious evolution. But where does this evolution take us? Sanchez asked. Julia didn't answer. She just held up the papers in her hand as though she expected us to read her mind. What? I asked. Sanchez reached over and touched my forearm. His look reminded me to stay alert and to wait. The ninth reveals our ultimate destiny, Julia said. It makes it all crystal clear. It reiterates that as humans, we are the culmination of the whole evolution. It talks about matter beginning in a weak form and increasing in complexity, element by element, then species by species, always evolving into a higher state of vibration.
Okay, so what does this mean? Everything has conscious awareness. They have found at the quantum level that if an experiment is going on at the atomic level, the presence of a person will shift the experiment. So if I'm thinking of hurting a table, the consciousness of the table will change, right? So consciousness evolves from the mineral level, from the molecular and the atomic level to the mineral level. The mineral involved into a plant level, the plant involved into insects and other creatures. Those creatures slowly started evolving into higher and higher and higher and higher species and creatures, more evolved, ultimately accumulating in the man. That's the theory of Darwin. Okay.
When primitive humans came along, we continued this evolution unconsciously by conquering others and gaining energy and moving forward a little bit, and then being conquered ourselves by someone else and losing our energy. This physical conflict continued until we invented democracy, a system that didn't end the conflict but shifted it from a physical to a mental level.
So again, in the beginning, what was most important? Survival, physical survival, shelter, food. Then it started becoming more abstract. Okay, that you started settling down, you started creating rules and regulations, you started evolving into family structures, then into villages, where the growth of evolution, so the basic survival thing goes away. Today we are not really fighting and figuring out where we are going to get the meal. We go to market and we get it. Okay, but previously you had to hunt for it, you had to grow it yourself. There was no shop or a place where you could just go and buy it. So the physical survival was the most important. Now, even we saw the same thing in the magical child, where the evolution of the child has to go through the matrix process. The first matrix is the mother. The second matrix is going out into the physical world a little away from the mother. Then it goes into mental activity. Then it goes into abstract thought. So ultimately, what is happening? It's evolving from the physical into the mental, into the abstract, and into the spiritual.
Now, Julia went on, we are bringing the whole process into consciousness. We can see that all of human history has prepared us to achieve conscious evolution. Now we can increase our energy and experience the coincidences consciously. This carries evolution onward at a faster pace, lifting our vibrations even higher.
So, as we become more consciously aware of what we are doing, rather than just meandering and, by trial and error, we make ourselves consciously aware that, okay, what's the next step? We wait for the signs. We are looking for the signs. Naturally, evolution and our growth will become more dynamic and exponential, right? We'll grow much faster.
She hesitated for a moment, looking at each of us, then repeated what she had said. Our destiny is to continue to increase our energy level, and as our energy level increases, the level of vibration in the atoms of our bodies increases. She hesitated again. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Julia said, that we are getting lighter, more purely spiritual.
So, what is it? The grosser you are, the slower your vibration is. So now today, if we are totally connected with only the material things, in the Gita you talk about the tamasic, the rajasic, and the sattvic. Now today, when you're tamasic, you're more heavy. Okay, you're more into the heavy vibrations. When you're becoming rajasic, you're more into the, I mean, you're shifting. When you're sattvic, you're dealing with the faster vibrations or the more subtle vibrations. Okay, so the kind of food you're eating, the kind of thoughts you're having, the kind of activities you're doing is very different when you're operating from a tamasic state of consciousness to compared to a sattvic state of consciousness. So there's a shift as soon as we are shifting from the tamasic to the sattvic, from the material to the spiritual.
She hesitated, looking at us, and then repeated what she had said. Our destiny is to continue to increase our energy level, and as our energy level increases, the level of vibration in the atoms of our body increases. She hesitated again. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Julia said, that we are getting lighter, more purely spiritual. I looked at Sanchez. He was focused intensely on Julia. The ninth insight, Julia continued, says that as we humans continue to increase our vibration, an amazing thing will begin to happen. Whole groups of people, once they reach a certain level, will suddenly become invisible to those who are still vibrating at a lower level. It will appear to the people on this lower level that the others just disappeared. But the group themselves will feel as though they are still right here, only they will feel lighter.
So now what is happening here, right? That it's like when we take an ice cube in our hand, we can hold it. The vibration is very slow. As we increase the vibration, it becomes water. As we increase the vibration further, it become steam. Now we can't see the steam, but the steam is still there. So likewise, when that picture came of that person here, that person is vibrating at a higher frequency than what we are operating at. So for us, technically, they are invisible. Now certain cameras, etc., could capture that figure. There is a full documentary that we have on orbs. Some of you may have seen it. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but many cameras, when they can capture pictures at the infrared level, we are able to capture the frequencies of the orbs. Okay, where you can actually see the orbs on print, and it's amazing the kind of pictures that come out. Maybe one of these days we'll see that documentary, but it can be captured, which is something what happened with Kavita Didi, where we saw that figure coming in that picture, right? So what was that? They are vibrating at a higher frequency. As Shimangla mentioned also, that Ravindraji constantly says, and even I can feel the presence many times. And Ravindraji and I, we tag up, he'll say four, I'll say, yes, there's four. And we are most of the time, we are, whatever figure he says, I'm experiencing the same. So we are actually collaborating or collating whatever both of us are experiencing. So like that, when you are operating at a higher frequency level, because our spectrum, like see, now The electromagnetic spectrum, for example, is like, it's like that, it's like that. But what are we observing? We are only observing so much, right? Now, if I increase the spectrum, then I can see more. But the person who's perceiving so much will not be able to perceive so much. So for them, this doesn't exist. But for a person who's perceiving at that level, it exists. So if the group is raising their vibratory level, naturally they cannot be seen by a person operating at a lower frequency of vibration, which is what we saw in the movie also.
As Julia talked, I noticed her face and body changing somewhat. Her body was taking on the characteristics of her energy field. Her features were still clear and distinct, but it was no longer muscles and skin at which I was looking. She looked as though she were made of pure light glowing from within. I looked at Sanchez. He appeared the same way. To my amazement, everything appeared this way: the pyramids, the stone under our feet, the surrounding forest, even my hands. The beauty I was able to perceive had increased beyond anything I had experienced before, even when on the ridge top.
So now what happened? As his energy level started to rise, right? Everything started becoming more beautiful. Everything started having more energy. Everything started becoming more and more subtle.
When humans begin to raise their vibrations to a level where others cannot see them, Julia continued, it will signal that we are crossing the barrier between this life and the other world from which we came and to which we go after death. This conscious crossing over is the path shown by the Christ. He opened up to the energy until he was so light he could walk on water. He transcended death right here on earth and was the first to cross over to expand the physical world into the spiritual. His life demonstrated how to do this. And if we connect with the same source, we can head the same way, step by step. At some point, everyone will vibrate highly enough so that we can walk into heaven in our same form.
So again, the idea here is to raise our vibrations to such an extent that we can go into those altered realms. So, what is happening when we are doing the hemisync, all the Monroe workshops? Because of the sound, we are taken into these altered realities where we can experience them while still being in our physical body. Okay, so this is exactly what happens in the Monroe processes, what they are talking about over here. Shivangla, what happened? Shimangla.
His movements seemed unusually graceful, as though he was gliding. The insight says, Julia went on, that most individuals will reach this level of vibration during the third millennium and in groups consisting of the people with whom they are most connected. But some cultures in history have already achieved the vibration. According to the ninth insight, the Mayans crossed over together. Julia abruptly stopped talking. From behind us, we heard muffled voices in Spanish. Dozens of soldiers were entering the ruins, coming right for us. To my surprise, I was unafraid. The soldiers continued to walk in our general direction, but strangely not directly towards us. They can't see us, Sanchez said. We're vibrating too highly. I looked again at the soldiers. He was right. They were walking 20 or 30 feet to our left, completely ignoring us.
So over here, he says one thing. To my surprise, I was unafraid. So whenever your vibratory frequency is high, you are centered and in equanimity. Generally, you will take the task at hand very, very efficiently and effectively. and you're not going to be bothered or get afraid. Okay, so you tend to become fearless as soon as your energy level rises.
Suddenly, we heard loud shouts in Spanish by the pyramid to our left. The soldiers closest to us stopped and ran in that direction. I strained to see what was happening. Another group of soldiers were emerging from the forest, holding the arms of two other men, Dobson and Phil. The sight of their capture jolted me, and I could feel my energy level plummet. I looked at Sanchez and Julia. Both were staring intently towards the soldiers and appearing equally disturbed. Wait! Will seemed to shout from the opposite direction. Don't lose your energy. I felt the words as well as heard them. They were slightly garbled.
So again, when you lose energy, you lose that vibration and you come back to a more grosser level. So now the soldiers are operating at a much more grosser level than the energy these people were tapping into, right? So the soldiers could not see them. Now, as their energy, the fear started creeping in, the anxiety started creeping in, that Dobson and the other guy were caught by the soldiers. Their energy level also fell. So they came back into a lower vibratory frequency.
We turned to see Will walking quickly towards us. As we watched, he seemed to say something else, but this time the words were completely unintelligible. I realized I was having trouble focusing. His image was becoming hazy, distorted. Gradually, as I stared in disbelief, he disappeared altogether.
So now what happened? Will was operating at a much higher frequency level, right? Now, as these people lost their frequency level, they could not communicate with him anymore, and suddenly he went out of view because they dropped their level of vibration.
We turned to see Will walking quickly towards us. As we watched, he seemed to say something else, but this time the words were completely unintelligible. I realized I was having trouble focusing. His image was becoming hazy, distorted. Gradually, as I stared in disbelief, he disappeared altogether. Julia turned to face Sanchez and me. Her energy level seemed lower, but she was completely undaunted, as though whatever just happened clarified something. We weren't able to maintain the vibration, she said. Fear lowers one's vibration tremendously. She looked towards the spot where Will had faded from view. The ninth insight says that while some individuals may cross over sporadically, a general rapture will not occur until we have abolished fear, until we can maintain a sufficient vibration in all situations.
So, okay, now, so fear, as soon as you have fear, anxiety, it will all put you on the left side of the grid. And these higher vibrations are all connected with the right side of the grid. So, it becomes so important for us to be consciously aware to operate on the right side of the grid.
Julia's excitement grew. Don't you see? We can do it. Yet, but the role, we can't do it yet. But the role of the ninth insight is to help create that confidence. The ninth insight is the insight of knowing where we are headed. All the other insights create a picture of the world as one of incredible beauty and energy, and ourselves as increasing our connection with and thus seeing this beauty.
So again, shifting from the left side of the grid to the right side of the grid. So to shift from the left to the right, we have to go into gratitude, love, appreciation, compassion, joy, happiness, uplifting energy fields, uplifting thoughts, uplifting actions, uplifting everything rather than anything which is depleting.
The more beauty we can see, the more we evolve. The more we evolve, the higher we vibrate. The ninth insight shows us that ultimately our increased perception and vibration will open us up to a heaven that is already before us. We just can't see it yet.
So multiple realities can exist in the same space. So wherever you're sitting, there can be multiple realities existing over there. Because we are unable to focus on that particular reality, because our vibratory frequency is lower than what is required to perceive those realities, we are unable to perceive them. So it's very much like, I don't know how many of you remember, but when we had these black and white TVs and those antennas on top, and you had to do something called fine tuning. Otherwise, what used to happen, the picture of one channel used to come and the sound of the other channel. So there was a crossover when the channel was not very clear. So things like the picture that we took the other day, it's a crossover, right? Where there is a crossing and there is a short circuit kind of a thing where this reality is coming into contact with that other reality. As we go into fringe, it will start talking about alternate realities also. So that's the actual reason why we started seeing the fringe. Of course, all sorts of things are happening, but it's fun. If you're just doing one episode a week, it's not going to matter so much. But ultimately, we are talking about alternate realities. And actually speaking, many realities exist in the same space. The analog for this is that there is one cable which is coming, one cable TV is coming, cable is coming to your house, and how many channels are existing in that one cable. Now today, I think maybe 1,000 channels can exist. Why? Because each of the channel is being transmitted at a different frequency. So whichever channel we tune our TV to, that is the channel that we see. So likewise, the reality that we are tuning ourselves to, that is the reality that we will perceive. So multiple possibilities are existing all the time. Where we focus our attention is what manifests. So it becomes so important that what are we thinking and where we are focusing our attention becomes important. So if I'm thinking depleting thoughts, that is what is going to manifest in my life. If I'm thinking uplifting thoughts, that is what is going to manifest in my life. Again, you cannot hoodwink yourself because you are witnessing what you are witnessing. So, like many people start doing affirmations, but they really don't believe in the affirmation. So, for manifestation, the thought and the feeling have to go hand in hand. So, that's why observing our thoughts become extremely important. So, what are they saying over here? Raising our vibratory level. Raising our vibratory level means what? Being aware of what you're doing, what you're thinking, where is it taking you, what is the state of consciousness that you're operating from. All that starts to become very important.
Whenever we doubt our own path or lose sight of the process, we must remember that we are evolving towards what the process of living is all about. Reaching heaven on earth is why we are here, and now we know how it can be done, how it will be done. She paused momentarily. The ninth mentions that a tenth insight exists. I think it must reveal. Before she could finish, a burst of machine gun fire ripped up the stone tiles by our feet. We all dived to the ground, our hands raised. No one spoke as the soldiers came and confiscated the papers and took each of us in a different direction.
So their vibratory frequency dropped, so the soldiers could see them, and then they were captured.
Should we stop or should we continue?
Continue, finish it.
The first
Read a little
weeks
faster.
after, huh?
Read faster now.
The first weeks after my capture was spent in constant terror. My energy level fell dramatically as one military officer after another questioned me threateningly about the manuscript. I played the dumb tourist and claimed ignorance. After all, it was true that I had no idea who among the other priests had copies or how widespread public acceptance of the document had become. Gradually, my tactic worked. Over time, the soldiers seemed to grow tired of me. Someone's annotating.
Go ahead, Nashi.
Array, it's coming all on. I played the dumb tourist and claimed ignorance. After all, it was true that I had no idea who among the other priests had copies, or how widespread public acceptance of the document had become. Gradually, my tactic worked. Over time, the soldiers seemed to grow tired of me and passed on to a group of civilian authorities who took a different approach. These officials sought to convince me that my trip to Peru had been crazy from the beginning. Crazy because, according to them, the manuscript never really existed. They argued that the insights had in fact been invented by a small group of priests with the intent to foster rebellion. I had been duped, these officials told me, and I let them talk. After a while, the conversations became almost cordial. Everyone began to treat me as a guiltless victim of this plot, as a gullible Yankee who had read too many adventure tales and found himself lost in a foreign country. And because my energy was so low, I possibly would have become vulnerable to this brainwashing had something else not occurred. I was suddenly transferred from the military base, where I was being held, to a governmental compound near the airport in Lima, a compound in which Father Carl was also being detained. The coincidence brought back some of my lost confidence. I was walking in the open courtyard when I first saw him sitting on a bench reading. I strolled over, restraining my exuberance and hoping I wouldn't attract attention from the officials inside the building. When I sat down, he looked up at me and grinned. "I've been expecting you," he said. "You have?" He put down his book, and I could see the delight in his eyes. "After Father Costus and I came to Lima," he explained, "we were immediately detained and separated, and I've been here in custody ever since. I couldn't understand why nothing seemed to be happening. Then I began to think repeatedly of you." He gave me a knowing look. "So, I figured would show up." "I'm grateful you're here," I said. "Did anyone tell you what happened at the Celestine ruins?" "Yes," Father Carl replied. "I spoke briefly with Father Sanchez. He was held here for a day before being taken away." "Is he all right? Did he know what happened to the others? And what about him? Were they going to imprison him?" He had no information about the others, and as for Father Sanchez, I don't know. The government's strategy is to methodically search out and destroy all copies of the manuscript, then to treat the whole affair as a grand hoax. We'll all be thoroughly discredited, I imagine, but who knows what they will ultimately do with us. "What about Dobson's copies?" I said. "The first and second insights he left in the States." "They already have them," Father Carl replied. "Father Sanchez told me that agents of the government found out where they were hidden and stole them. Apparently, Peruvian agents have been very everywhere. They knew about Dobson from the beginning and about your friend Charlene. And you think when the government is through, no copies will remain? I think it will be a miracle if any survive." I turned away, feeling my newfound energy diminish. "You know what this means, don't you?" Father Carl asked. I looked at him but said nothing. "This means," he continued, "that each of us must remember exactly what the manuscript said. You and Sanchez didn't convince Cardinal Sebastian to release the manuscript, but you delayed him long enough for the ninth insight to be understood. Now it has to be communicated. You have to be involved in communicating it."
So now what happened? Now that means now what Father Carl is telling him is that you have to be the one who actually decimates it to the rest of the world.
His statement made me feel pressured, and my aloof drama activated inside me. I leaned against the back of the bench and looked away, which made Father Carl laugh. Then, at just that moment, we both realized several embassy officials were watching us from an office window.
So now what happened? See, the controlled dramas is something that we very easily slip into. That's why it becomes very, very important that we are constantly, consciously aware of these dramas playing out. Okay. The more aware we become, the more powerfully we can deal with them.
Listen, Father Carl said quickly. From now on, the insights will have to be shared between people. Each person, once they hear the message and realize that the insights are real, must pass on the message to everyone who is ready for it. Connecting with energy is something humans have to be open to and talking about and expecting. Otherwise, the whole human race can go back to pretending that life is about having power over others and exploiting the planet. If we go back to doing this, then we won't survive. Each of us must do what we can to get this message out. I noticed that the two officials were out of the building walking towards us. One more thing, Father Carl said, speaking slowly. What? I asked. Father Sanchez told me Julia had spoken of a tenth insight. It hasn't yet been found, and no one knows where it might be. The officials were almost on us. I've been thinking, Father Carl continued, that we don't need to release you. You may be the only one that can look for it. The men suddenly interrupted our conversation and escorted me towards the building. Father Carl smiled and waved and said something else, but I could only half pay attention. As soon as Father Carl had mentioned a tenth insight, I had been consumed by a thought of Charlene. Why was I thinking of her? How was she connected to a tenth insight? The two men
So again,
were
now he's paying attention. He started paying attention. That if something happens, what's the thought which comes up? So what is coming up from below the line? Okay, the more aware we become, the more connected we become.
The two men insisted that I pack the few things I had left and follow them to the front of the embassy and into a state vehicle. From there, I was taken directly to the airport and up to a boarding concourse. One of them smiled faintly and looked at me from behind thick glasses. His smile faded as he handed me a passport and a ticket for a flight to the United States, then told me in a heavy Peruvian accent to never, never return.
Okay. So that